You, Kesha, come. Let me educate you. Omar Al Mansoor's voice sliced through the delicate clink of Turkish coffee cups and hushed diplomatic murmurs like a sword through silk. Kesha Williams froze, the crystal decanter suddenly heavy in her grip. She was just the maid, a shadow that moved between marble columns and golden fixtures. But tonight, she was being dragged into the spotlight for one reason only: his entertainment. Yes, the chessboard. Omar continued, his manicured hand gesturing lazily toward the pearl and obsidian set that gleamed like an altar of ego. Sit. This will be instructive. The foreign delegates leaned forward, lips curving into knowing smirks, phones already angled to capture her impending humiliation. I want to see if service workers can think beyond cleaning schedules, Omar said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But then, from the servants' corridor, a clear voice cut through the performance. My mother doesn't play, sir, but I do. The laughter died. A 13-year-old girl in a school uniform had just challenged one of Dubai's most feared billionaires. What began as an arrogant test of power ended as a reckoning the world would stream 1,000,000 times over. This is the story of how a maid's daughter checkmated a man who thought he owned everything, including respect. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far Amber's story reaches. And hit subscribe tomorrow. We're revealing what happened to Omar's empire after the match. Now, let's go back to that night. A child's calm would soon dismantle a billionaire's world. Her mother was invisible to the man who could buy nations, but he was about to discover the one thing his wealth couldn't purchase: her daughter's genius. The evening had the texture of orchestrated elegance, Vivaldi strings floating through speakers hidden in crown molding, the amber glow of baccarat crystal reflecting off Italian marble floors polished to mirrors. From his position in a custom wingback chair, upholstered in midnight blue velvet that cost more than a year of Kesha's salary, Omar Al Mansoor surveyed his kingdom. His penthouse occupied the 87th floor of Al Mansoor Tower, a needle of glass and steel piercing the Dubai Marina skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Persian Gulf like a painting, the city's lights spreading beneath him like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Every object in this space, from the Damascus steel sculptures to the 18th-century Ottoman chess set under museum lighting, whispered the same message: I have conquered. At 42, Omar had built his empire from his grandfather's oil fortune and his own ruthless intellect. He had everything wealth could manifest, yet felt the hollow ache of a man who'd played every game and won. Boredom was his most persistent adversary, a numbness that no acquisition could cure. His guests were the usual assemblage of people who orbited power like moths circling flame. There were British investment bankers with rehearsed laughter, Emirati diplomats who spoke in calculated compliments, and socialites in Dior who touched his arm a beat too long. They were all predictable, movable, forgettable. His attention drifted past their performance, scanning for anything to relieve the tedium, and then he saw her. Kesha Williams moved along the room's perimeter with the practiced invisibility of domestic labor. She was American, somewhere in her mid-30s, a widow who'd been cleaning his properties for 18 months. She carried a silver tray, collecting empty glasses, her expression carefully blank the face of someone who'd learned to disappear in plain sight. To Omar, she was furniture that breathed, part of the machinery that kept his world frictionless. He knew she had a daughter. He'd occasionally glimpsed the girl in the service quarters, quiet, always reading, green eyes that seemed too aware for a child. He'd never bothered learning either of their names. Why would he? They were background characters in his story. But tonight, as the party's predictable rhythm grated against his restlessness, a thought crystallized. Dark, amusing, perfect. A little demonstration for his guests. A reminder of the natural order. Entertainment at the expense of someone who couldn't refuse. He raised his voice, rich, commanding, impossible to ignore. Kesha, come here. Every conversation stopped mid-word. Every head pivoted. Susan's hand froze over a champagne flute, her reflection visible in its curved surface, wide eyes, jaw tight. For a heartbeat, she prayed he meant someone else. But the room's collective gaze fixed on her like stage lights, pinning her in place. She set down the decanter with trembling precision and turned toward him, the tray held like a shield across her chest. Yes, Mr. Al Mansoor? her voice barely carried across the sudden silence. Omar smiled, the slow, asymmetric smile of a cat cornering a bird. He gestured to the space before him, where the ancient chess set waited on a low table of black walnut and mother-of-pearl inlay. "Put that down. You're finished serving for the moment." Kesha's pulse hammered in her throat. She obeyed, placing the tray on a side table, her hands betraying the fear she tried to contain. The silence was suffocating, thick with the anticipation of cruelty. She could feel the guests' stares, some curious, some pitying, all hungry for the spectacle about to unfold. "I've heard," Omar began, his tone dripping with theatrical generosity, "that people from humble backgrounds have practical intelligence. Let's test that theory. Sit, play chess with me." A ripple of laughter moved through the room, not quite loud, but unmistakable. "If you win," he continued, settling deeper into his chair, "I'll triple your salary. If you lose," he paused for effect, "you'll polish my Bentley fleet every morning for a month. By hand." More laughter. Phones lifted slightly, recording angles adjusted. Kesha's face burned. Her throat closed. This wasn't an invitation, it was a public execution dressed as generosity. She opened her mouth to decline, to preserve some shred of dignity, when, "Sir, excuse me, may I play instead?" Every eye shifted to the doorway. Amber Williams stepped forward from the corridor's shadows, still in her school uniform, white blouse, navy vest, pleated skirt. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. In her hands, she held a worn paperback. "Bobby Fischer teaches chess," its spine creased from countless readings. The girl was 13, small for her age, but there was something in her posture, a stillness, a clarity that didn't match childhood. Omar's eyebrows lifted. "And who are you?" "Amber Williams, Kesha's daughter." Her voice was steady, almost formal. No tremor, no deference. She walked forward with a calm that made several guests exchange glances. Omar leaned back, genuinely amused now. "A child wants to play chess with me? Oh, this just became interesting." He looked around the room, inviting everyone into the joke. "Shall we give the girl a lesson, everyone?" Applause, chuckles. Phones now openly recording. Kesha's hand flew to her mouth. "Amber, no." But Amber was already sitting down across from Omar, adjusting the board with small, precise movements. She met his eyes without blinking. "Unless," she said quietly, "you're afraid to lose." The room went completely silent. Omar's smile froze for just a moment, a flicker of something passing behind his eyes. Then it widened, darker now. "Oh, little one, let me show you what power looks like." He moved his pawn to e4. Amber, without hesitation, responded with c5. And in that moment, though no one yet realized it, the game and Omar's carefully constructed world had already begun to crack. The sun was dying over the Persian Gulf, bleeding orange and gold across the horizon like a wound in the sky. The light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Al Mansoor Tower's 87th floor, transforming the penthouse into a cathedral of glass and fire. Every surface, the marble floors, the crystal sculptures, the polished chrome fixtures caught and multiplied the glow until the entire space seemed to pulse with borrowed radiance. Omar Al Mansoor stood at the center of this engineered paradise, backlit like a figure in a Renaissance painting, his white dish dasher catching the sunset until it seemed to glow from within. Around him, his guests arranged themselves in a careful constellation of power and proximity. Emirati businessmen in pristine kanduras conversed in low Arabic, their gold watches catching the light with each gesture. European women in Chanel and Valentino perched on white leather sofas, their laughter like the tinkling of wind chimes, decorative, hollow, precisely calibrated. A long table of Calcutta marble dominated the center of the room, its surface set with Arabic coffee in delicate porcelain cups, dates arranged like offerings, and crystallized ginger that glittered like fragments of amber. But the true centerpiece, the object that drew every eye when conversation lulled, was the chess set. It was an antique, Ottoman era, crafted from pearl and obsidian, each piece hand-carved by artisans dead for centuries. The white pieces gleamed with an inner luminescence, the black pieces absorbed light like small black holes. Omar had acquired it at auction in London for a sum that could have fed a village for a year. He kept it on display not because he played often, but because it was rare, because owning it meant someone else could not. He ran his fingers across the obsidian queen now, feeling the cool smoothness of stone that had survived empires. When he spoke, his voice cut through the ambient chatter like a blade through water. "You know," he said, addressing no one and everyone, "even kings must test the loyalty of their servants." The conversations paused, heads turned. Omar smiled, enjoying the way attention bent toward him like light toward gravity. "Loyalty," he continued, lifting the queen and examining it against the dying sun, "is the rarest commodity. Rarer than oil. Rarer than this." He gestured vaguely at the chess piece. "Most people will serve you until the moment serving becomes inconvenient. But true loyalty? That requires proving." A French investor named Marcel shifted forward. "And how does one prove loyalty, Mr. Al Mansoor?" Omar's smile widened, predatory and gleaming. "By seeing if they can think under pressure, if they can adapt, if they can." He paused, scanning the room with theatrical deliberation until his gaze landed exactly where he'd intended it to. Play the game. Kesha Williams was refilling water glasses at the peripheral refreshment station, a ghost in a grey uniform moving with practiced efficiency. She felt his attention before she heard her name, the way prey senses a predator's focus. Kesha. Her hand stilled over a crystal pitcher. The water inside trembled, concentric circles spreading across its surface. "Come here." It wasn't a request. It never was. She set down the pitcher with exaggerated care, as if any sudden movement might shatter the moment, might wake her from this nightmare. When she turned, every face in the room was watching her. 20 pairs of eyes, maybe more, all suddenly interested in the woman they'd ignored for 18 months. "Yes, Mr. Al Mansoor?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. Omar gestured to the chair across from him, the one that faced the chess set and the wall of windows beyond, where Dubai Marina's towers stood like monuments to ambition and excess. "Sit. I have a theory I'd like to test." Kesha's feet moved before her mind could catch up, carrying her across the marble floor that suddenly felt like ice, slippery and treacherous. She could hear her pulse in her ears, a timpani of dread. "You see," Omar continued conversationally as she approached, "I believe that intelligence, real strategic intelligence, is not something everyone possesses. It's not about education. It's about breeding, about the quality of one's mind." He settled into his chair with the ease of a man who'd never questioned his right to any space he occupied. "Let's see if you can think as fast as you clean." Laughter rippled through the room, not quite cruel, but not kind either. The sound of people grateful they weren't the target. Kesha lowered herself into the chair, her spine rigid, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. The chessboard between them looked enormous, infinite, a battlefield she'd never asked to enter. "One game," Omar announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. He was performing now, conducting a symphony of humiliation with himself as maestro. "Simple stakes. You win unlikely, but theoretically possible, and I double your salary for the year. You lose." He paused, savoring the moment. "And you polish my Rolls Royce every morning for the next 6 months. By hand. With a toothbrush if necessary." More laughter. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, screens glowing, recording angles being adjusted. This would make excellent dinner party conversation, excellent social media content. You'll never believe what Omar did. From the shadows of the service corridor, 13-year-old Amber Williams watched through the partially open door, her heart a stone in her chest. She clutched her worn copy of Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess, its pages soft from countless readings, margins filled with her careful annotations. She'd been waiting for her mother, ready to walk home together after the shift ended, when she'd heard Omar's voice carrying that particular tone, the one that meant someone was about to be made small. She watched her mother's hands shake as they reached for the pieces, watched the guests lean forward with predatory interest, watched Omar's smile sharp as glass, empty as a display window. "No," she thought. "No, no, no. White moves first," Omar said, magnanimous as a king granting mercy. "Please, begin." Kesha had played chess exactly twice in her life, both times with her late husband during their courtship, games punctuated by laughter and stolen kisses. She'd lost both times happily. She knew the pieces moved, knew roughly how, but strategy, pattern recognition, the brutal calculus of sacrifice and advantage, she might as well have been asked to perform surgery. She moved a pawn forward, e3, hesitant, random. Omar responded instantly, his knight leaping to f6 in a Nimzo Indian defense setup that meant nothing to her but everything to the few actual players in the room, who exchanged knowing glances. "He's toying with her," those glances said. "This will be over in minutes." The next moves passed in a blur of mounting panic. Kesha moved pieces because she had to move them, because stopping would be surrender, because her daughter was watching and she had to try, had to... "Check," Omar said softly, moving his bishop into position with a click that sounded like a door closing. Kesha stared at the board, her vision tunneling. She could see her king was threatened, could see she needed to move it, but where? Every square looked dangerous, every option wrong. She reached for her bishop the wrong piece, a move that would leave her king vulnerable from another angle entirely, and the guests began to murmur, that particular sound of collective second-hand embarrassment mixed with voyeuristic satisfaction. Omar leaned back, his fingers steepled, his expression the picture of benevolent disappointment. "You see? Strategy isn't for everyone. It requires vision, foresight, the ability to see patterns that—" "She doesn't play, sir." The voice came from the corridor, clear and steady as a bell. Every head turned. Amber stood in the doorway, still in her school uniform white blouse, navy vest, pleated skirt, knee socks, and worn trainers. She looked impossibly small in the massive doorway, a child-sized interruption in an adult's world. But there was something in her posture, in the level way she met Omar's gaze, that made her seem suddenly larger than her 13 years. "I do," she continued, stepping forward into the light. The room went silent, not the performative silence of before, but something deeper, the silence of shifted expectations, of the script suddenly departing from its expected course. Omar's smile returned, but different now, intrigued. "And who are you to interrupt?" "Amber Williams." She walked toward the table with measured steps, each footfall deliberate. Kesha's daughter. The guests exchanged glances. A few smiled, anticipating a new entertainment. A child who thought she could play chess. How adorable, how doomed. Omar studied her, this small intruder with serious green eyes and a worn paperback clutched like a talisman. There was something in her expression, not defiance exactly, but certainty. The look of someone who knew something others didn't. "You want to play chess?" He said it slowly, tasting each word. "With me?" "Yes, sir." "And what makes you think you'd fare better than your mother?" Amber's gaze didn't waver. "Because I've studied, because I understand the game. Because..." She paused, then delivered the line with perfect calm. "Unless you're afraid to lose." A ripple of gasps moved through the room. Someone whispered, "Did she just..." Marcel, the French investor, actually laughed, a bark of delighted surprise. "Mon Dieu, the child has spirit." Omar's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a spark of genuine interest, or perhaps offense. He gestured to Kesha, who rose from her chair with the grateful relief of someone granted last-minute clemency. "Very well," Omar said, his voice silk over steel. "Let's see what education you've given yourself." He began resetting the pieces to their starting positions, each one placed with deliberate precision. "Same stakes. Win impossibly, and your mother's salary doubles. Lose, and she scrubs my cars until summer. Deal?" Amber slid into the chair her mother had vacated, the seat still warm. She set her book down beside the board and began helping reset the pieces, her small hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Deal," she said quietly. Omar selected white, always the advantage of the first move, and pushed his king's pawn to e4, the most common opening in chess, the beginning of infinite possibility. The room held its breath. Amber looked at the board for exactly 3 seconds. Then her hand moved, small fingers wrapping around the black pawn on c7, lifting it, placing it with soft certainty on c5. In the corner of the room, An Emirati businessman who'd played competitive chess in university straightened in his seat. She opened with the Sicilian. He murmured to his companion, "That's not a beginner's move." Omar's smile tightened fractionally. He'd expected the king's pawn defense, perhaps, or the French. Something safe, something defensive. The Sicilian was aggressive, complex, an opening that led to sharp, tactical play. He moved his knight to f3, the open Sicilian, accepting her challenge. Amber responded with d6, the dragon variation set up. Omar's fingers paused over his next piece, just for a moment. The dragon. Even more aggressive, even more dangerous if the player knew what they were doing. She's bluffing, he told himself. She's memorized an opening from a book. She'll collapse when we leave theory. But as the moves continued, Nat 6, d4, cx d4, Nat x d4, g6, he felt the first whisper of something he hadn't felt at a chessboard in years. The guests had gone quiet, watching the small girl and the powerful man move pieces across pearl and obsidian, each click of wood on marble like a heartbeat, like a countdown, like the ticking of a clock measuring the seconds until everything changed. Amber's eyes never left the board. Her expression remained serene, almost meditative, as if she were listening to music only she could hear. Omar studied her across the battlefield of 64 squares and 32 pieces. Studied the concentration in her young face, the slight furrow between her brows, the way her lips moved silently, calculating. Who is this child? He wondered. And then, with a flash of irritation at his own doubt, it doesn't matter. She's still just a maid's daughter. He moved his knight to c3, developing with tempo. Amber castled kingside, tucking her king to safety. The game continued, move by measured move, and the sunset outside the windows deepened from gold to blood orange to purple. The city lights began their nightly bloom, a million points of electricity defying the darkness. But inside the penthouse, everyone's attention had narrowed to a single point, the chessboard where a 13-year-old girl played as if she'd been born for this moment. Because, in a way she didn't yet fully understand, she had been. The first pawn had moved, the world had tilted, and neither Omar Al Mansoor nor anyone watching understood yet that this game, this seemingly small contest between a billionaire and a child, would not end when the pieces were cleared from the board. It was only just beginning. The sun had fully surrendered now, leaving the penthouse bathed in artificial light, recessed LEDs that cast everything in a cool, theatrical glow. Someone had lit candles on the marble table, tall tapers in silver holders that flickered and danced, throwing shadows across the chess pieces until they seemed to multiply, an army of ghosts surrounding the real battlefield. Amber sat perfectly still in the oversized leather chair, her feet dangling several inches above the Persian rug, her school shoes catching the candlelight. She looked even smaller now against the chair's high back, a child playing dress-up in an adult's seat, but her hands on the board moved with a precision that had nothing childish about it. The position on the board had evolved into something complex, dangerous. Omar had developed his pieces aggressively, both knights deployed, bishops controlling diagonals, his queen lurking on d2 like a coiled snake. It was a strong position, the kind that crushed amateur players through sheer coordinated pressure. But Amber hadn't collapsed. She'd castled queenside, an unusual choice that had raised eyebrows among the spectators, and now her pieces formed a strange, organic structure that seemed chaotic but held together with hidden logic. Her rooks were doubled on the d-file, her dark-squared bishop aimed at Omar's king position, like a sniper finding range. Move 17, Omar's turn. He studied the board for a full minute, longer than he'd taken on any previous move. Something was wrong with the position, something he couldn't quite articulate. It felt like standing on ground that looked solid but concealed quicksand. He pushed his knight from c3 to e4, a centralizing move that looked powerful, that added another piece to his attack. Amber's response was immediate. She lifted her knight from f6 and placed it on d4 right in the center of the board, apparently hanging, undefended, free for the taking. The guests murmured. Several shook their heads. One woman in a champagne-colored gown whispered loudly enough to be heard, "The poor thing just gave away her knight." Omar's eyes narrowed. It had to be a blunder. Children made blunders. Even talented children lost track of pieces, forgot threats, Miscalculated. He scanned the board for the trap. There had to be a trap, but saw nothing. The knight was simply hanging. Free. A full piece up would give him an overwhelming advantage. "Are you certain about that move?" he asked, the question wrapped in false concern. A cat playing with wounded prey. Amber met his gaze, her green eyes reflecting candlelight. "Yes, sir." He took the knight with his E4 knight, capturing it with a decisive click. "Who taught you to play?" he asked, unable to keep the condescension from his voice. "This opening?" "My grandpa," Amber said softly, her fingers already moving to her next piece, her rook, sliding from D8 to D1, invading his back rank with a whisper of felt on marble. "He taught me in London before he passed. He was a taxi driver, but he loved chess. He used to say—" She paused, moving her queen from a 5 to E1, and suddenly Omar's entire position seized up like an engine with a thrown rod. "That life is a game people forget they're losing." Check. Omar's king stood on E1, suddenly trapped by his own pieces. The rook on D1 controlled the entire first rank. The queen on E1 delivered check. His queen on D2 was pinned, unable to move without exposing his king to the rook. His knight on D4, the piece he'd just captured with, was now attacking nothing. Stranded in enemy territory, useless. The room went completely silent. Omar stared at the board, his mind racing through variations, defensive tries, escape routes. He could block with his f-pawn, pushing it to f1, but then he played it, pawn to f1. Amber captured it with her queen, qxf, 1+, check again. The notation was simple, elegant, devastating. Each move flowed into the next like water finding cracks in stone, widening them, breaking through. Omar's king fled to D2, the only legal move. Amber brought her other rook into play, the one from 8, swinging all the way across to D8. Another check. The pieces were converging like wolves on wounded prey. Someone in the audience, Marcel, the French investor, let out a low whistle. She sacrificed the knight for this. Mon Dieu. She saw this 4 moves ago. Omar's hand hovered over his king. Sweat had begun to form at his temples, tiny beads that caught the candlelight. His jaw was tight, a muscle pulsing beneath his carefully groomed beard. He moved his king to C3, trying to run toward the center, away from the coordinated assault. But there was nowhere to run. Amber's small hand pressed the chess clock with a soft click, not aggressive, not triumphant, just matter-of-fact. The mechanical tick-tick-tick of the clock filled the silence like a heartbeat, like time itself counting down. "Check," she said quietly. The next moves unfolded with the inevitability of gravity, of water flowing downhill, of consequences arriving right on schedule. Omar tried to defend, brought his queen back to D3, activated his bishop to E2, pushed pawns forward to create escape squares, but every defense had been anticipated, every resource exhausted before it could be deployed. Amber's pieces danced across the board with surgical precision. Rook to D1, queen to C2, rook to C1. The coordination was beautiful, in the way a storm is beautiful, in the way a predator's strike is beautiful, efficient, inevitable, perfect. Move 23. Amber lifted her queen, held it for just a moment in her small fingers, then placed it on C3 with the gentlest of touches. "Checkmate," she said, so quietly that half the room had to lean forward to hear. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. 20 pairs of eyes stared at the board, at the impossible arrangement of pieces, at the billionaire's king trapped in a web of black pieces with no legal moves, no escape, no defense. Omar sat frozen, his eyes fixed on his fallen king, as if staring long enough might change the position, might rewrite what had just happened. "She beat him," someone whispered, the voice carrying in the dead silence. "The maid's girl beat him." The spell broke. Conversations erupted, urgent, disbelieving. Phones lifted higher, recording angles adjusted to capture Omar's face, Amber's calm expression, the board position itself. Several guests were already typing furiously, sharing this moment with the world outside these walls. A woman in crimson silk turned to her companion. "Did you see that combination? The knight sacrifice, the rook invasion that was master-level calculation. How old did she say she was?" 13. 13 years old. Kesha stood at the edge of the room, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears gathering in her eyes, pride and terror mixed in equal measure. Her daughter, her quiet, book-reading, too serious daughter, had just humiliated one of the most powerful men in Dubai. Omar finally looked up from the board, his expression carefully controlled, smile forced back into place like a mask retrieved from the floor. But beneath the surface, something dark was moving, a riptide of rage and wounded pride. "Well," he said, his voice level but edged with something sharp. "That was unexpected." He stood, tugging his dish dasher straight, reasserting control through gesture and posture. Beginner's luck, clearly. Chess has a high luck factor in individual games. Marcel laughed, couldn't help himself. "Omar, there is no luck in chess. The child saw 4 moves ahead while you—" "We'll play again," Omar interrupted, his voice cutting across the room like a blade. The smile was still there, but it had teeth now. "Tomorrow, at my charity gala at the Dubai Mall. Let's give the world a proper show, a rematch." It wasn't an invitation, it was a command wrapped in courtesy, a threat disguised as generosity. Kesha moved forward instinctively, reaching for her daughter. "Mr. Al Mansoor, that's very kind, but we couldn't possibly—" "You could," Omar said, his gaze locking onto hers. "You will, unless of course you'd prefer to resign your position tonight." He let the question hang, poisonous, perfectly weighted. The room went silent again, everyone suddenly finding their shoes fascinating, their drinks urgent. Amber stood, pushing the heavy chair back with both hands. She was still perfectly calm, but something had shifted in her expression, a hardness around her eyes, a set to her jaw. "We'll come," she said, her voice clear. "What time?" Omar's smile widened. 7 p.m. Sharp. I'm hosting several international guests, investors, diplomats. They'll be fascinated to see the young prodigy everyone will be talking about by morning. He gestured toward the door with exaggerated politeness. "Kesha, you're dismissed for the evening. Take your daughter home. Let her rest. She'll need it." Kesha took Amber's hand. Her daughter's small fingers were cool, steady, and moved toward the service corridor. The guests parted for them, some with expressions of pity, others with naked curiosity. A few looked at Amber with something approaching wonder. As they reached the doorway, Marcel's voice called out, "Mademoiselle Amber!" She turned. He raised his glass in a small salute. "That was the finest queen sacrifice I've seen outside of professional competition. Wherever you learned to play, they taught you well." Amber nodded once, a slight dip of her head that managed to convey both acknowledgement and dismissal, then disappeared into the corridor with her mother. The moment they were gone, the room erupted into conversation. Omar stood at the center of it, accepting condolences disguised as compliments, jokes about computer-trained children, suggestions that someone should check the girl for hidden devices. But inside, behind the smile, behind the performance, a cold rage was building. He had been beaten, publicly, by a child, by a servant's child. The videos were probably uploading already, racing across social media at the speed of light, turning him into a joke, a cautionary tale, a meme. It was intolerable. Tomorrow, he would correct this. Tomorrow, with proper preparation, with full focus, he would crush this little girl so thoroughly that tonight would be remembered only as a fluke, an aberration. He moved to the window, staring out at his city of glass and gold, his reflection ghostly in the darkened glass. "Tomorrow," he murmured to himself. In the service elevator, descending through the building's steel heart, Kesha pulled Amber close, her arms tight around her daughter's shoulders. "Baby, what were you thinking?" Her voice was torn between pride and fear. "Do you know what you just did? Do you know who that man is?" Amber leaned into her mother's embrace, suddenly looking her age again, just a tired girl at the end of a long day. But her voice when she spoke held that same strange certainty. "Grandpa used to say that bullies only understand one language. You have to speak it clearly. And what language is that?" "Winning." The elevator dinged, doors opening onto the ground floor lobby where marble and fountains and night guards waited. Kesha guided her daughter toward the exit, toward the Dubai night and the bus stop and their small apartment in Dera, where the rent was almost manageable and the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors' conversations. But as they stepped into the warm evening air, as the towers of Dubai Marina glittered around them like vertical rivers of light, Amber paused and looked back up at the 87th floor, at the windows glowing gold against the darkness. "Mom," she said softly. "Yes, baby?" "Tomorrow, when we go back." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It won't be about chess anymore. You know that, right?" Kesha looked down at her daughter, at the serious expression, the eyes that had seen too much, understood too much. She pulled her close again, kissed the top of her head. "I know," she whispered. They walked to the bus stop in silence, mother and daughter, hand in hand, while above them the city's towers stood like witnesses, like judges, like chess pieces arranged by hands larger than any billionaire's reach. And in apartments and offices and hotel rooms across Dubai, across the Emirates, across the world, phones lit up with notifications, with videos, with the story already beginning to spread. Billionaire Omar Al Mansoor, defeated by one 3-year-old maid's daughter in chess. The world was watching now. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. The servants' quarters occupied the eastern corner of Al Mansoor Tower's 3rd floor, a different universe from the penthouse, separated by 84 floors and an unbridgeable gulf of wealth. Where the penthouse gleamed with marble and crystal, here the walls were painted institutional beige, fluorescent tubes hummed their mechanical song, and the air smelled of industrial detergent and other people's cooking. Kesha's room was barely large enough for a single bed, a narrow wardrobe, and a hot plate balanced on a plastic table. The window, a small square of glass that didn't open, looked out over the service alley where delivery trucks idled and air conditioning units dripped condensation onto concrete. Beyond, the neon lights of Dubai Marina shimmered through the glass like a fever dream, all that impossible wealth pressing against the thin barrier between her world and theirs. It was past midnight. Amber sat cross-legged on the bed, still in her school uniform, while Kesha pulled their suitcase from beneath the wardrobe, an old grey thing with a broken wheel that listed to one side like a wounded animal. "We're leaving," Kesha said, her voice tight, controlled. She opened drawers, pulling out clothes without looking, shoving them into the suitcase with trembling hands. "Tonight, before morning, before anyone realizes we're gone." Amber watched her mother's frantic movements, the panic barely contained beneath the surface. "Mom, you don't understand what you've done," Kesha's voice cracked. She grabbed a photo frame from the nightstand Amber's grandfather, smiling in his London taxi, and wrapped it in a sweater. "You humiliated a man who can buy anything. Countries, people, silence. He can buy all of it. Then he can't buy a win." The words came out soft but firm, and they stopped Kesha's hands mid-motion. She turned to look at her daughter, this small girl who just spoken with the certainty of someone 3 times her age. "This isn't about winning anymore, Amber. This is about survival. Men like Omar, they don't forgive. They don't forget. They—" A knock at the door. Sharp, urgent. Both of them froze. Another knock, followed by a familiar voice. "Kesha? It's Marina. Please, I need to talk to you." Kesha opened the door a crack. Marina stood in the hallway, another maid, Romanian, in her 50s, still in her uniform. Her phone glowed in her hand, screen filled with video footage. "Have you seen?" Marina whispered urgently, pushing into the room. "Have you seen what's happening?" She held up her phone. The screen showed footage from tonight, amateur video shot on someone's iPhone. Slightly shaky, but perfectly clear. Amber sitting across from Omar, the chess pieces moving. The moment of checkmate. The shocked silence. "It's everywhere," Marina said, scrolling frantically. "Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, everyone is sharing it. Look." She opened Twitter. The hashtag Checkmate Omar was trending. Thousands of tweets, videos, comments, memes. One video had 2.3 million views already. The caption read, "One 3-year-old maid's daughter destroys Dubai billionaire at chess. Watch him realize he's lost." Another showed just the final checkmate position, overlaid with dramatic music. When you think money can buy intelligence. Kesha's face went pale. Her hand found Amber's shoulder, gripped it tight. Marina kept scrolling. The local news is picking it up. Al Arabiya, Gulf News. They're calling her the girl who beat Al Mansoor. Some are saying it's fake, staged. Others are saying she's a secret chess prodigy. Everyone is talking about it. Marina, Kesha whispered, we need to leave. Can you cover for us? Just for a few hours, just until... Leave? Marina looked at her like she'd suggested flying. Kesha, you can't leave. He'll find you. And besides, she gestured at the phone. The whole world is watching now. Where would you go that people wouldn't recognize her? As if summoning demons by speaking their name, Kesha's own phone buzzed on the bed. Then again. And again. Notifications flooding in like a dam breaking. Amber picked it up, swiped through the alerts. Friend requests on social media platforms Kesha didn't even use. Messages from reporters. Emails from strangers. A text from someone claiming to be a talent scout. Another from a chess club in London offering free membership. It's already too late, Amber said quietly. 84 floors above, in the penthouse's private office, all dark wood and leather chairs and windows that frame Dubai like a conquest, Omar Al Mansoor sat behind his desk, his phone face down, refusing to look at it, even as it buzzed with notification after notification. His assistant, Farid, stood by the door, tablet clutched in both hands, his expression carefully neutral in the way of people who deliver bad news to powerful men. Sir, Farid said carefully, perhaps we should discuss the situation. There is no situation. Omar's voice was ice. He stared out the window at his city, his empire, his proof of dominance. A child got lucky. Nothing more. With respect, sir. Farid unlocked his tablet, approached the desk. The videos are spreading very quickly. Checkmate Omar is the #1 trend in the UAE. #3 globally. The Guardian has already published an article. CNN is requesting comment. Omar's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing beneath his beard. Then we issue a statement. The girl is talented. I'm delighted to have discovered her potential. I'll be sponsoring her chess education as part of my charitable initiatives. So people are laughing. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Omar turned slowly, his dark eyes fixing on Farid with the intensity of a man unaccustomed to hearing truth, spoken plainly. The memes, sir. Farid's voice remained steady, professional. They're mocking you. When you're so rich you can't buy a chess win. Billionaire gets schooled by one 3-year-old. There's a video with 5 million views it's just you realizing you've lost. Set to that Curb Your Enthusiasm theme music. Omar stood, walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The city below looked like a circuit board, all those lights and lines of connection. Somewhere out there, millions of people were watching his humiliation replay on loop. Maybe, Farid continued carefully, we should end it here, issue a gracious statement, make a generous donation to youth chess programs in her name, move on. Let it become a feel-good story instead of a what? Omar's voice was soft, dangerous. Farid swallowed. A story about power and pride. Silence. The air conditioning whispered through invisible vents. Somewhere far below, the city continued its nightly commerce, indifferent to the drama playing out in this glass tower. No, Omar said finally. We don't end it. We finish it. Properly. Publicly. He turned from the window, and in his eyes was something cold and calculating, the look of a man who'd built an empire by refusing to accept defeat. Tomorrow, no. Today. It's already past midnight. Today at 7 p.m., we'll have a rematch. At the Dubai Mall. Central Atrium. I'll make it a charity event. All proceeds to children's education. We'll market it properly. Billionaire versus Prodigy. The rematch. We'll sell tickets. Stream it live. Make it an event. Sir, that's... What? Petty? Vindictive? Omar smiled without warmth. It's strategy, Farid. Right now, I look weak. But when I beat her in front of thousands, when I show the world that tonight was a fluke, that preparation and experience triumph over viral novelty, then I look magnanimous, generous. a mentor teaching a young talent about the real world. And if she wins again? Omar's expression darkened. She won't. Tonight I was unprepared, distracted, treating it as entertainment. Tomorrow I'll study her game. I'll prepare. I'll remind everyone why I'm the one who built all this. He gestured at the office, the tower, the city beyond. I'll remind them what power looks like. Farid nodded slowly, recognizing the futility of further argument. I'll contact the mall management, the press. We'll need security for crowd control. And the girl, should I reach out to her mother? No need, Omar said. I already invited them. They'll come. They have no choice. After Farid left, Omar stood alone in his office, surrounded by the evidence of his accomplishments, framed magazine covers, photos with presidents and princes, awards from business councils and charitable foundations. All of it suddenly felt hollow, fragile, as glass. He pulled out his phone, finally allowed himself to watch one of the videos. There he was, confident and smiling, then confused, then shocked, then trying to hide his shock beneath a mask of forced graciousness. He looked weak, foolish, old, and the girl he watched, her small hand move the pieces with such certainty, such calm, as if she'd seen the entire game before it was played. Who taught her? He wondered. Who was she really? It didn't matter. Tomorrow he would take back his dignity. Tomorrow he would show the world that viral moments were not the same as real power. He opened his chess app, began setting up the position from tonight's game, began analyzing where he'd gone wrong, how he could crush her style, what openings he could use to avoid her prepared lines. He worked until dawn began to pale the eastern sky, until his eyes burned and his back ached, until he'd convinced himself that tomorrow was already won. In the servants' quarters, Kesha had stopped packing. What was the point? Marina was right. Where could they run that the internet wouldn't follow? She sat on the bed beside Amber, the suitcase open on the floor like a mouth that would never be fed. I'm scared, she whispered, saying it aloud for the first time. Amber took her mother's hand, squeezed it. Me too. They sat in silence for a while, the neon lights casting colored shadows through the window, pink, blue, green, the cycling advertisements for luxury brands that neither of them would ever afford. Mom? Amber said finally. Yes, baby. Do you remember what Grandpa used to say about fear? Kesha smiled despite everything, felt tears gathering. He said fear is just respect without understanding. He said, Amber's voice took on the cadence of memory, of a beloved voice speaking through her. Don't fear kings, learn how they move, learn their patterns. Then you'll see they're just pieces on a board like everything else. Kesha pulled her daughter close, breathed in the scent of her hair school soap and youth, and her innocence that tonight's events had endangered. Promise me something, Kesha said. What? Promise me that tomorrow, no matter what happens, you'll remember you're still just a kid. You're allowed to be scared. You're allowed to lose. You don't have to carry the weight of... She gestured vaguely at the world beyond their walls. All of this. Amber was quiet for a long moment. Then, I promise. But Mom. Yes? I'm not going to lose. The night aged toward morning. Across Dubai, the story spread like wildfire through dry grass. In expatriate compounds, parents showed their children the video. See? Education matters. Practice matters. In boardrooms, executives made jokes. Better not challenge the new intern to chess, might be another Al Mansoor situation. In coffee shops and malls and taxi queues, people debated. Was the girl really that good? Or had Omar thrown the game? Was it staged? A publicity stunt? Or genuine genius emerging from unexpected places? In newsrooms, editors assigned reporters, booked camera crews, cleared primetime slots for what was already being called the match of the year. And in a small room on the third floor of Al Mansoor Tower, a 13-year-old girl sat on her bed with an empty chessboard in her lap, playing through games in her mind, hearing her grandfather's voice like a compass pointing north. The queen is powerful, but predictable. Everyone sees the queen. They forget about the pawns, the quiet pieces that suddenly become dangerous when no one's watching. That's what we are, Amber. Pawns the kings forgot to watch. Outside, The first light of dawn began to push back the darkness, turning the sky from black to navy to the soft grey of uncertain beginnings. In 12 hours, the world would be watching. The storm was gathering, pressure building in the silence before thunder. And in that small room, with neon lights flickering through cheap glass, a child prepared to face a billionaire again, not because she wanted to, but because the current had already caught them both, pulling them toward a collision neither could avoid. The pieces were set. The clock was running, and Dubai held its breath, waiting to see how the next game would end. Chapter 4. The Gala Challenge. The Palm Jumeirah emerged from the Persian Gulf, like a declaration of human ambition over nature. Artificial archipelago, shaped like a palm tree. Visible from space, home to the kind of wealth that measured itself in private beaches and helicopter landings. The Atlantis Hotel rose at its crown, a monument to excess dressed as luxury, its golden spires catching the late afternoon sun. Omar's charity gala occupied the hotel's grand ballroom, a cathedral of marble and crystal, where chandeliers the size of cars hung from gilded ceilings, where each table setting cost more than a month of Kesha's salary, where Dubai's elite gathered in their finest armor of couture and diamonds. The invitation had read, "An evening of culture and competition, Chess Masters Exhibition for Children's Education Fund." What it meant was, come watch Omar Al Mansoor restore his reputation. By 6:30, the ballroom was packed. Women in Elie Saab and Zuhair Murad glided between tables, their jewelry catching light like small galaxies. Men in bespoke suits and traditional kanduras clustered near the bar, voices low, deals being sketched on cocktail napkins. Photographers from Gulf News and Al Arabiya set up angles near the stage, where two leather chairs faced each other across a professional tournament chess set wooden pieces, weighted, magnetic board, a digital clock that would be visible to the entire room via overhead screens. This was theatre. This was spectacle. This was Omar taking back control of the narrative. He stood near the entrance in a crisp white kandura with gold cufflinks, playing host, shaking hands, accepting donations for the cause with practiced humility. But his eyes kept flicking to the entrance, to the velvet ropes, where a security guard checked names against a list. Waiting, Kesha and Amber arrived at 6:45 in a taxi that seemed embarrassed to pull up to the valet stand behind Bentleys and Maseratis. They dressed as well as they could, Kesha in a simple navy dress she'd bought for job interviews years ago. Amber in her school uniform, cleaned and pressed until the pleats stood sharp as knives. As they stepped out, camera flashes erupted like fireworks. A reporter shoved a microphone toward Amber. "How do you feel about the rematch? Are you nervous?" Another called out, "Did anyone help you prepare? Do you have a coach?" Security guards materialized, creating a corridor through the press gauntlet. Amber kept her eyes forward, her hand tight in her mother's. Kesha felt her face burning, aware of every lens focused on them, every stranger's judgment. They weren't guests. They were exhibits. Omar appeared at the entrance like a choreographed reveal, his smile broad and public, his hand extended in greeting. The cameras swiveled to capture the moment, the billionaire welcoming the viral sensation, magnanimous in victory before the game had even begun. "Amber, Kesha, welcome, welcome." His voice carried that practiced warmth of politicians and salesmen. He took Kesha's hand in both of his, the picture of benevolent mentor. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. Tonight we raise money for children just like Amber, bright minds that deserve every opportunity." The cameras loved it. The guests applauded politely. But as Omar leaned down to Amber's level, his voice dropped to something only the three of them could hear, his smile never wavering. "Ready to earn your mother's freedom?" Kesha's eyes filled not with tears yet, but with something sharp and painful. Shame, the understanding that they were trapped, that this was never about charity or chess or opportunity. This was about a man's wounded ego, and they were the instruments of its healing. "Sir, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible beneath the ballroom's ambient noise. "She's just a child." Omar straightened, his public smile back in place. "Then the lesson will be short." He gestured towards the stage with exaggerated courtesy. "Shall we?" The stage was elevated, theatrical 3 steps up, spotlit, impossible to miss. As Omar and Amber took their seats, the ballroom quieted, conversations trailing off like music fading out. Waiters froze mid-pour. Guests turned their chairs towards the stage. The overhead screens flickered to life, showing the chessboard from multiple angles, showing Omar's confident expression, showing Amber's small hands folded in her lap. A representative from the Children's Education Fund took the microphone, said something about the evening's purpose, about Omar's generosity, about the special exhibition match they were honored to witness. Her words washed over the crowd like elevator music, pleasant and forgettable. What everyone was really here for sat at that board, waiting. Omar chose white, always white, and made his opening move without ceremony. Pawn to e4, classical, aggressive. The opening of Fischer and Kasparov, and every player who believed in direct confrontation. Amber responded with c5. The Sicilian defense again, the same opening that had undone him last night. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some smiled knowingly she was repeating her strategy, predictable, catchable. Others leaned forward, remembering last night's video, wondering if she had more than one trick. Omar had prepared for this. He'd spent the entire day with his private chess coach, a grandmaster from St. Petersburg who'd walked him through every variation of the Sicilian, every common trap, every tactical pitfall. He knew what she'd played yesterday. He wouldn't be caught again. He played knight 3 the open Sicilian, accepting her challenge. But then, on move 3, he diverged from last night's pattern. Instead of d4, he played bb5 the Rossolimo variation, an aggressive system designed to punish over-preparation, to take the game into positions where memorization mattered less than pure calculation. The Grandmaster spectators in the crowd recognized it immediately. One, a Emirati businessman who'd played in amateur championships, nodded appreciatively. Smart, he's avoiding her preparation. Amber paused. It was the first time she'd hesitated, her hand hovering over the pieces. The overhead screen magnified her face, young, serious, processing. Then she moved. Knight to c6. Book move, solid, flexible. The game unfolded. Omar played aggressively, pushing pawns, activating pieces, creating threats. By move 8, he'd trapped one of her pawns, forced a weakness in her position. The crowd stirred, sensing momentum shift. He's winning, someone whispered, loud enough to carry. She looks uncomfortable, another observed. On the screen, Amber's position looked cramped, defensive. Omar had more space, better piece coordination, a passed pawn advancing on the queen side like a battering ram. Omar leaned back in his chair, allowed himself a small smile. This was more like it. This was the natural order reasserting itself, experience over youth, preparation over improvisation. Move 12. He pushed his queen to b3, adding pressure to her weakened pawn structure, forcing her to make uncomfortable defensive choices. Amber studied the board for a long moment. Then, very faintly, she smiled. It was tiny, barely a curve of her lips, but it was there, and something about it made Omar's confidence flicker like a candle in wind. She moved her knight from f6 to d5, apparently retreating, apparently passive. Omar frowned. He'd expected her to defend the pawn, to try to hold her position together. Instead, she was abandoning it, letting it fall. Was she cracking under pressure? Making desperation moves? He captured the pawn with his queen. Queen tapped 5. Material advantage. The crowd murmured approval. Amber's next move was immediate, as if she'd been waiting for him to take that pawn. Knight from b8 to c6, attacking his advanced queen. Omar moved his queen to safety, to d1, back toward his own lines. Then Amber's pieces began to flow. Bishop to f5, controlling dark squares. Rook to c8, pressuring the c-file. Queen to d7, coordinating with her pieces. Moves that looked random, unconnected, but were weaving together into something. Omar saw it 2 moves too late. The pawn he'd captured hadn't been weakness. It had been bait. She'd sacrificed it deliberately, and while he'd been collecting material, she'd been positioning her pieces for an attack he hadn't seen coming. Move 16. Amber's rook slid to c1, invading his back rank, and suddenly his entire position seized up. His queen on d1 was pinned. His king on e1 was vulnerable. His pieces, all his carefully developed pieces, were suddenly out of position, unable to defend, committed to an attack that no longer existed. "Check," Amber said quietly. The ballroom erupted in gasps. The overhead screen showed the position clearly: Omar's king in danger, his pieces scrambling, the initiative completely reversed. Omar's jaw tightened. He moved his king to F2, trying to activate it, trying to find counterplay. Amber pressed forward. Her pieces converged like wolves who'd scented blood. Rook to C2, forking his queen and threatening his unprotected bishop. Queen to D4, centralizing with check. The moves came faster now. Omar defending, Amber attacking. The crowd leaning forward, transfixed. Move 20. Amber's knight jumped to E3, a fork, attacking both Omar's queen and his rook simultaneously. Several people in the audience gasped. A woman dropped her champagne glass, the crystal shattering on marble floor, but no one looked away from the board. Omar stared at the position, his mind racing through variations, escape routes, defensive resources. There were none. He'd have to give up his queen or his rook. Either way, the game was over. His hand hovered over the pieces, unwilling to make the move that would seal his fate. "You attacked too quickly," Amber said, her voice carrying in the electric silence. She wasn't gloating, wasn't cruel. She was simply stating a fact, teaching a lesson. "You never see the trap you set for yourself." Omar's face flushed dark. He could feel every eye on him, every camera recording, every phone capturing this moment that would replay forever on the internet. His hand slammed down on the chess clock, stopping it, the sharp crack echoing through the ballroom. "Enough!" His voice was thunder, rage barely controlled. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping backward. "This proves nothing. Best of 3. Tomorrow. Dubai Mall. Central Atrium. Public venue. Professional arbiters. No more of these. Private exhibitions." The crowd erupted into confused chatter. Some applauded nervously, unsure what they were applauding for. Others whispered urgently, phones already out, typing, sharing, uploading. Omar turned to Kesha, who stood at the stage's edge, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Tomorrow, 6 p.m. Be there, both of you." It wasn't an invitation anymore. It was a command wrapped in silk, a threat disguised as opportunity. He strode off the stage, his kandura billowing, his expression fixed in that CEO smile that concealed everything and revealed nothing. His assistant Farid materialized beside him, tablet already out, damage control already beginning. Left on the stage, under the lights, with hundreds of eyes staring, Amber sat very still, looking at the board where the pieces told the story of Omar's second defeat. Kesha rushed to her daughter, pulled her into a tight embrace. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. We'll figure this out." But Amber wasn't crying. She wasn't even shaking. When she spoke, her voice was clear, steady. "Mom, he's getting angrier. That makes him more dangerous. But also," she paused, looking at the board, "also more predictable." Around them, the ballroom returned to its gala rhythm, waiters clearing plates, guests resuming conversations, the orchestra beginning their next set. But the energy had changed. People kept glancing at the stage, at the small girl being led away by her mother, at the chessboard that told the story of impossible victory. Outside, as Kesha and Amber left through the service entrance to avoid the press, as they waited for their taxi behind the dumpsters where the real work of luxury happened, Kesha finally let herself cry. "What have we gotten into?" she whispered. Amber squeezed her mother's hand, thinking of her grandfather, of his taxi in London, of the chess sets made from bottle caps and coins, of his voice saying, "Sometimes the game finds you, love, and when it does, you can't walk away until it's finished." "One more game," Amber said. "Tomorrow. Then it's over." But even as she said it, watching the Atlantis Hotel glitter against the darkening sky like a golden monument to human hubris, she wondered if it would ever really be over. Some games, once started, had a momentum of their own, and this one had only just begun its middle game. The sky above Palm Jumeirah deepened to purple, then black, stars appearing like distant witnesses to the drama unfolding below. Somewhere in that vast night, Omar Al Mansoor was planning, strategizing, preparing for tomorrow's battle. And somewhere in a taxi, heading back to the servants' quarters, A 13-year-old girl closed her eyes and played through the game in her mind, searching for patterns, looking for the move that would end everything. Tomorrow, Dubai Mall. Tomorrow, the world watching. Tomorrow, checkmate one way or another. The rooftop of Al Mansoor Tower's workers' quarters was a forgotten space, concrete and gravel. Air conditioning units humming their mechanical prayers. Laundry lines strung between ventilation shafts where uniforms dried stiff in the desert air. It wasn't meant to be accessed, but someone had bent the lock on the access door years ago, and now it served as an unofficial refuge for those who needed to breathe air that didn't taste of other people's lives. Kesha stood at the edge, not too close to fall, but close enough to see everything. Dubai Creek winding through the city like a dark vein, the wind rippling its surface with silver. Beyond it, the towers of Dubai stood like sentinels, their windows glowing with the light of 10,000 lives being lived simultaneously. Somewhere in one of those towers, Omar Al Mansoor was planning tomorrow. Somewhere down below, reporters were still camped outside the building's entrance, waiting for a glimpse, a story to feed the beast that news had become. She'd held it together all evening, through the gala, through the taxi ride home, through Marina's worried questions, and the building manager's stern reminder that all this attention was disrupting the other residents. She'd held it together while making Amber a simple dinner of rice and canned beans, while helping her daughter review chess positions on her tablet, while tucking her into bed with a kiss and a whispered, "It will be okay," that felt like a lie. But now, alone under the stars that barely penetrated Dubai's light pollution, Kesha let herself break. She cried the way you cry when you're trying not to make sound, shoulders shaking, breath hitching, tears running hot down her cheeks and cold when the wind touched them. She cried for her daughter's stolen innocence, for the fear she saw beneath Amber's brave face, for her own helplessness. She cried for her late husband, for her father who'd passed 2 years ago, for all the people who should have been here to help carry this burden but were gone, leaving only memories and silence. "Mom?" Kesha spun. Amber stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thin blanket, her grandfather's pocket watch clutched in one hand, an old brass thing that hadn't worked in years, but that she carried everywhere like a talisman. "Baby, you should be sleeping." "Couldn't." Amber walked to the edge, stood beside her mother, the wind playing with her blonde hair. She looked up at Kesha with those two knowing green eyes. "You're scared." It wasn't a question. Kesha wiped her face roughly, tried to compose herself. "I'm supposed to protect you. Instead, I'm watching you fight battles that—" her voice cracked. "That aren't yours to fight." Amber turned the pocket watch over in her small hands, running her thumb across the engraved initials on the back. J.W. Joseph Williams. Her grandfather. The taxi driver who'd loved chess and poetry and terrible jokes. "Grandpa used to tell me something," Amber said quietly, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "When I'd get frustrated with a position, when I couldn't see the solution, he'd say, 'Every queen was once a pawn that refused to move backward.'" Kesha looked down at her daughter, this small person who somehow contained multitudes. "He said pawns have a choice," Amber continued, still studying the watch. "They can stay safe, never advance, never risk, never become something more. Or they can push forward, even when it's dangerous, even when they might be captured, because that's the only way they transform." She looked up at her mother. "We're pushing forward, Mom. We can't go back now." Kesha pulled Amber close, the blanket wrapping both of them. They stood like that for a long time, mother and daughter, while the city sprawled beneath them and the wind carried the smell of the creek, salt and petroleum, and the faint sweetness of jasmine from someone's rooftop garden. "One more game," Kesha whispered into her daughter's hair. "Then we're done. Whatever happens, we walk away." Amber nodded against her mother's shoulder, but she said nothing, because they both knew that walking away wasn't always a choice you got to make. 84 floors above, Omar Al Mansoor stood in his penthouse living room, still dressed in his kandura from the gala, a crystal tumbler of 25-year-old scotch in his hand. The liquid caught the light from the city below, amber and gold, expensive as liquid sunlight. He'd dismissed the staff hours ago, told Fareed not to disturb him, locked the doors and drawn the curtains, or tried to draw them, before realizing that closing off his view felt like admitting defeat, like hiding. So now he stood in the darkness with Dubai spread beneath him like proof of his dominance, and drank and stared at the tablet on the coffee table as if it were a bomb that might explode. The screen glowed with his latest humiliation, the algorithm serving him an endless scroll of his own defeat. A TikTok with 8 million views, the moment Amber forked his queen and rook, set to that dramatic opera music. Caption: point of view: you realize money can't buy talent. A Twitter thread with 50,000 retweets dissecting his psychological collapse, complete with screenshots of his facial expressions charted like a medical diagnosis. An Instagram reel comparing his 3 expressions across both games: confident, confused, crushed. The comments were merciless. A Reddit thread on chess titled Omar Al Mansoor's Games Analyzed. Why he keeps losing to a 1-3-year-old. The top comment gilded 6 times. Because he's a rich amateur who thinks money equals skill, and she's an actual prodigy. Next question. He tried ignoring it, tried having Farid issue statements, tried focusing on tomorrow's preparation. But every time he closed his eyes, he heard laughter, thousands of voices, millions maybe, all laughing at him, at Omar Al Mansoor, the man who'd built an empire from sand and will, reduced to a meme, a punchline, a cautionary tale about hubris. The tablet showed a new notification. Another meme. This one showed his face photoshopped onto a crying emoji with the text, "When you're so rich you can't even buy a chess win against a kid." Something inside him snapped. He grabbed the tablet, $2,000 of engineering and design, and hurled it across the room. It hit the marble wall with a satisfying crack, the screen spiderwebbing, the device clattering to the floor in pieces. The silence that followed felt good, cleansing. Then his phone buzzed on the bar. Another notification. The cycle never stopped. The internet never slept. Somewhere, right now, someone was watching his humiliation, sharing it, laughing at it, adding their commentary to the endless stream of judgment. "Sir?" Omar spun. Farid stood in the doorway. He'd used his key card. Must have heard the crash, his expression carefully neutral, his posture conveying both concern and readiness to retreat if necessary. "I told you not to disturb me." "Yes, sir, but I thought you should know." Farid held up his own phone. "Kuhn is running the story internationally. BBC picked it up. Al Jazeera did a segment. Billionaire's pride versus child genius. The chess match captivating the world. Sir, the world is watching. Everyone is watching." Omar drained his scotch, the burn in his throat a welcome distraction. "Good. Sir?" "Let them watch." He set the glass down with exaggerated care, each movement precise, controlled. "Tomorrow, at Dubai Mall, they'll witness something different. They'll see what happens when preparation meets publicity, when experience crushes novelty." His voice was cold, flat, the voice of a man who'd made billion-dollar decisions without flinching. "They'll witness my revenge." Farid hesitated. "Sir, with respect, she's beaten you twice. And tomorrow will be even more public, more pressure. If you lose again, I won't lose." Omar turned to face him fully, and in his eyes was something dangerous, something that made Farid take an involuntary step back. "I've hired Dmitry Volkov to coach me through the night. I've studied every game she's played. I've analyzed her style, her tendencies, her weaknesses. She's talented, yes, but she's also 13. 13-year-olds crack under pressure. They make mistakes. Tomorrow, in front of thousands, with cameras everywhere, when the reality of what she's doing finally hits her, she'll crumble. And if she doesn't?" The silence stretched like wire-pulled taut, ready to snap. "She will," Omar said finally, "because I'm not playing to win anymore. I'm playing to destroy. There's a difference." Farid nodded slowly, recognizing dismissal in his boss's tone. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Sir, the girl Amber, she's just a child. Whatever happens tomorrow, please remember that." Omar said nothing. After Farid left, he poured another scotch, walked to the window, and stared out at his city. Somewhere down there, that little girl was sleeping, dreaming of queens and knights and checkmates, not understanding that tomorrow wasn't about chess. Tomorrow was about power. about putting people back in their place, about reminding the world that viral moments were not the same as real strength. He raised his glass to the distant lights, a solitary toast to tomorrow's victory that he could already taste. The hours before dawn moved like syrup, slow and thick with anticipation. In the servants' quarters, Amber couldn't sleep. She sat cross-legged on her bed, her tablet propped on her knees, playing through chess simulations against the computer set to its highest difficulty. Her grandfather's pocket watch sat beside her, its broken hands frozen at 3:47, the exact time he'd died, though she didn't know that, had never been told. She played game after game, testing openings, exploring lines, searching for the pattern that would unlock tomorrow, the Sicilian, the French, the King's Indian. Each game a conversation between her and the algorithm, each loss a lesson, each win a confirmation of possibility. At 4 a.m., she finally slept, the tablet still glowing beside her, showing a position where she'd just checkmated the computer in 47 moves. In the master bedroom of an apartment 3 floors up, Kesha worked her second job taking in sewing for a boutique in Dera, mending hems and fixing zippers for dirham rates that barely covered electricity. But tonight, she couldn't focus. She'd pricked her finger twice, left small blood drops on expensive fabric that she'd have to pay for. Finally, she gave up, pushed the work aside, and did what she hadn't done since her husband's funeral. She prayed. Not to any particular god. Her faith had eroded under the weight of loss and struggle. But she prayed anyway, to the universe, to luck, to her father's memory, to whatever force might be listening in the dark. Keep her safe. Whatever happens tomorrow, just keep her safe. Outside the building, reporters camped in air-conditioned vans, playing cards, drinking coffee from thermoses, swapping stories and betting on outcomes. A correspondent from BBC had flown in that afternoon. CNN had sent their Gulf bureau chief. Social media influencers with millions of followers set up livestream equipment, ready to capture every moment. Dubai Mall's management had closed the central atrium to regular shopping, cordoned off the area, installed professional lighting and cameras, set up bleachers for the expected crowd. Security teams reviewed protocols. First aid stations stood ready. It was being treated like a premiere, like a sporting event, like a moment that would define something larger than itself. Across the city, in apartments and villas and hotel rooms, people set alarms for 6 p.m. They cancelled dinner plans. They invited friends over to watch. The anticipation built like pressure in a sealed container, waiting for release. The sun rose over Dubai, turning the Gulf from black to silver, to that particular shade of blue that looked like hope, distilled into color. The towers caught the light and threw it back. A million windows becoming mirrors, becoming eyes, all watching, all waiting. In penthouse suites and workers' quarters, in newsrooms and living rooms, in coffee shops where people gathered around tablets, and in taxis where drivers tuned their radios to stations that promised live coverage, the city held its collective breath. By noon, Checkmate in Dubai was trending globally. By 3 p.m., Dubai Mall's parking structures were full, with overflow parking extending to nearby hotels. By 5 p.m., the atrium was packed with spectators, cameras, reporters from 6 continents, and enough internet bandwidth to stream this moment to the world. Somewhere in that crowd, Omar Al Mansoor sat in a green room, preparing, visualizing, breathing exercises, taught by sports psychologists and meditation coaches. He wore a fresh kandura, perfectly pressed. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. He was ready. In a small bathroom off the mall's service corridor, Kesha braided Amber's hair, her fingers gentle, her touch conveying everything words couldn't: love, fear, pride, desperation. "You don't have to do this," she whispered one last time. Amber met her mother's eyes in the mirror. "Yes, I do." At 5:55 p.m., they walked toward the atrium, toward the lights and cameras and the sound of 1,000 conversations suddenly falling silent. The storm had gathered, the pieces were set, and in 5 minutes, the game that would change everything would begin. The central atrium of Dubai Mall transformed into something between a Roman Colosseum and a television studio, a spectacle designed for maximum drama, maximum visibility, maximum consequence. The massive space, normally home to shoppers, and the famous aquarium waterfall, had been cleared and reconfigured overnight into an arena. Bleachers rose on 3 sides, packed with spectators who'd queued for hours, tourists and locals, chess enthusiasts and curiosity seekers, people who'd flown in from Bahrain and Abu Dhabi just to witness this moment. 3,000 people, maybe more, their collective anticipation humming like electricity through power lines. At the center, a raised platform held 2 chairs, one significantly larger than the other, facing each other across a regulation tournament board. The pieces were Staunton pattern, weighted, the kind used in World Championship matches. 4 cameras on robotic arms circled the setup, feeding live footage to LED screens the size of billboards mounted throughout the mall. Every face in the crowd could watch in crystal clarity. Every move would be visible from every angle. The lighting was theatrical. Professional key lights, eliminating shadows. Fill lights creating depth. A subtle backlight that would make both players visible even in silhouette. This was no longer a game. This was production. This was spectacle. This was war dressed as entertainment. Amber stood in the service corridor with her mother, watching the crowd through a gap in the curtains. She wore the only other outfit she owned besides her school uniform, a simple white cotton dress that Kesha had bought her 2 birthdays ago, already slightly too small, the hem hitting above her knees. No jewelry, except her grandfather's broken pocket watch on a chain around her neck. Her blonde hair was braided simply, efficiently. She looked exactly like what she was, a child who hadn't asked for this moment but would face it anyway. "You don't have to do this," Kesha whispered for what felt like the 100th time, her hand tight on Amber's shoulder. "We can leave. Walk out that door, get on a bus. They can't make you play." Amber turned to look at her mother, and in her eyes was something older than 13, the weight of understanding that some currents, once you're caught in them, don't release you until they're done. "If I don't play, he'll destroy us anyway. This way, at least I have a chance." Before Kesha could respond, a young woman in a mall management uniform appeared, clipboard in hand, professional smile in place. "Miss Williams, we're ready for you." The crowd's murmur swelled to a roar as Amber stepped onto the platform, climbing the 3 steps that made her ascent visible, symbolic, like approaching an altar or a throne. She moved carefully, in her too small dress, acutely aware of 3,000 pairs of eyes, of dozens of cameras, of the LED screens showing her face magnified to giant proportions, every freckle, every nervous blink, every breath. She sat in the smaller chair, her feet barely touching the floor, her hands folded in her lap. The pocket watch pressed cool against her chest through the thin cotton. The applause was uncertain. Split some cheering for the underdog, others loyal to Omar's wealth and power, many simply here for the spectacle itself, allegiances fluid as water. Then Omar made his entrance. He appeared from the opposite corridor, flanked by 2 security guards in dark suits, their presence unnecessary but symbolic, a reminder of resources, of power, of the machinery that surrounded men like him. He wore a tailored thobe in cream white with subtle gold threading, perfectly pressed, his beard trimmed to geometric precision, his steps measured and confident. The applause for him was louder, more coordinated, the sound of money recognizing its own, of power acknowledging power. He waved once, gracious as a politician, then ascended to the platform with the ease of someone who'd walked onto stages his entire life. As he sat across from Amber, he leaned forward slightly, his voice too low for the microphones to catch. "Last chance to withdraw gracefully, little one." Amber met his gaze without flinching. "You first." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, or respect, or rage so compressed it looked like ice. An announcer's voice boomed through the sound system. Arabic first, then English. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Dubai Mall Chess Exhibition. Tonight, businessman and philanthropist Omar Al Mansoor faces 13-year-old chess prodigy Amber Williams in their 3rd and deciding match. All proceeds benefit the Children's Education Fund." The phrase, deciding match, hung in the air as if this were a planned trilogy, as if they'd agreed to this narrative, when really it was just escalation, just pride refusing to surrender. The match will be played under FIDE rapid rules, 15 minutes per side. Mr. Al Mansoor, having lost the draw, will play black. Miss Williams will play white. White, the first move, the psychological advantage. Amber had won the coin toss in the moments before entering. Omar's expression had tightened fractionally, one more thing not going according to his plan. "Players, are you ready?" They both nodded. "Then begin." Amber moved without hesitation. Pawn to e4. The king's pawn opening, classical, aggressive, the opening of champions. Omar responded with c6. The Caro-Can defense, solid, strategic, less sharp than the Sicilian. A choice that said, "I'm playing for a long game. I'm going to strangle you slowly." The pieces developed. Knight to f3, d5, x5, cx, d5. Standard lines, nothing fancy yet. Both players building their positions like architects, raising foundations before adding walls. But on move 7, Omar deviated from standard theory. He pushed his pawn to h5, an aggressive, unusual move, starting an immediate attack on Amber's kingside before he'd finished developing his pieces. The Grandmaster commentators watching from their VIP section exchanged glances. One, a Belarusian international master, hired by the streaming service, spoke into his microphone. "Very aggressive from Al Mansoor. He's not playing positionally anymore. He's playing for the knockout." Omar pressed forward relentlessly. Every move was an attack. Pawns advanced. His knight jumped to g4, targeting Amber's kingside. His queen swung to the h-file, adding pressure. Pieces poured toward her king like water breaching a dam. The cameras caught Amber's face, focused, serious, thinking. The clock ticked down. She had 8 minutes left. Omar had 11. By move 20, Omar had a powerful attack. His pieces surrounded Amber's king. Her position looked cramped, defensive, on the verge of collapse. The crowd leaned forward, sensing blood. "He's got her," someone whispered, loud enough to carry in the suddenly tense silence. "Look at that position. She's got nowhere to go." The girl's cracking. You can see it. On the LED screens, chess engines analyzed the position in real time. The evaluation bar showed white negative 1.8. Amber was losing. Objectively, mathematically losing. Omar moved his queen to h7, threatening checkmate in 2 moves. The crowd gasped. Amber would have to defend, had to defend. Every piece needed to scramble back to stop the immediate threat. She studied the board for 30 seconds. Her hand hovered over her rook. The logical move would be rook to e8, defending, buying time, surviving. Instead, she lifted her rook from a 1 and placed it on a 3, not defending at all, moving laterally, apparently abandoning her king to its fate. The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. The commentators went silent, recalculating, trying to understand. Omar stared at the move, his hand frozen halfway to his next piece. It made no sense. She was giving him exactly what he wanted, a clear path to checkmate. Was she resigning in all but name, offering a symbolic sacrifice before the inevitable? He took 30 seconds of his own clock, searching for the trap. Found nothing. She'd simply blundered under pressure, just as he'd predicted. The 13-year-old, faced with thousands watching, had finally cracked. He played the obvious move. Queen takes h7, check. Her king forced to f8. Amber's next move was immediate. Rook to a 1, still lateral, still apparently pointless. Omar's bishop delivered check, forcing her king to e7. Then Amber moved her queen from d8 all the way across to a 5, and suddenly the position exploded with hidden meaning. The queen on a 5 attacked Omar's king. The rook on a 1 supported it. Her knight, previously dormant on b8, had a jump to d7, blocking his queen's retreat path. Her bishop on c8, which everyone had forgotten about, suddenly aimed at his exposed king. Omar saw it, really saw it, 3 seconds too late. The rook sacrifice hadn't been a blunder. It had been a decoy. A piece of bait so large, so obvious, that he'd bitten without thinking. And while he'd been collecting material, while he'd been attacking her king, she'd been quietly, impossibly, setting up an attack on his king that was already unstoppable. "Check," Amber said softly. Omar moved his king to dad1, the only legal move. Amber's knight jumped to d7, blocking the queen's return, controlling critical squares, coordinating with her queen and bishop. Check. Omar's king fled to e2. Amber's queen slid to e5, and the entire position collapsed like a house of cards in wind. Checkmate. The word landed like a thunderclap. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. 3,000 people and dozens of cameras all frozen, trying to process what had just happened. Then the atrium exploded. The roar was deafening shock and disbelief and joy and horror all mixed together. The sound of collective catharsis. People jumped to their feet. Phones rose like torches. Camera flashes erupted like strobe lights. Strangers embraced. Someone screamed. Someone else was crying. On the LED screens, replays began immediately: the rook sacrifice, the queen swing, the knight jump, the final checkmate position shown from 6 different angles. The chess engine's evaluation bar had whipsawed from -1.8 to +0 to mate in 3 inches, the space of 4 moves. The commentators were shouting over each other. She saw it. She saw the entire combination. The rook sacrifice was intentional. It was a decoy to remove his queen from the defense. That's master-level calculation. That's world championship level vision. Omar sat frozen, staring at the board as if staring long enough might change it, might rewrite reality. His carefully constructed attack, his overwhelming position, his certain victory, all of it revealed as illusion, as trap, as the setup for his own destruction. His hands trembled. His face had gone pale beneath his tan. For the first time in decades, Omar Al Mansoor looked exactly like what he was: a man who'd built everything on the belief that wealth equaled worth, and who'd just been proven catastrophically wrong. Amber sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm. Not triumphant, not gloating, just complete. Like someone who'd carried a weight for miles and could finally set it down. Kesha pushed through the crowd, security guards trying and failing to stop her, and reached the platform. She pulled Amber into her arms, both of them shaking, both of them crying now. Relief and terror and love, all mixed together. The crowd continued its roar. Phones continued recording. Somewhere, algorithms were already spreading this moment across continents, across oceans, across the invisible networks that connected humanity in webs of attention and judgment. A camera drone, launched by the streaming service, rose above the atrium, up past the bleachers, up past the LED screens, up towards the glass ceiling that let in the Dubai night. From that height, the scene below looked like art, like poetry, like something painted by someone commenting on the nature of power. A tiny girl in a white dress, standing on a platform, surrounded by thousands. A billionaire in cream white, sitting alone, staring at pieces that told the story of his defeat. The contrast absolute, the message clear. And, as the drone continued rising, as the atrium became smaller, and the city became visible through the glass, all those towers and lights and monuments to human ambition, the moment crystallized into something larger than chess, larger than personal drama. It became a story the world would tell itself about what mattered, about where real power lived, about the difference between what money could buy and what it couldn't. The feed from that drone would be viewed 100 million times in the next 48 hours. The hashtag Amber the Prodigy would trend globally for 3 days. But in that moment, Amber didn't know any of that. She only knew her mother's arms around her, the weight lifted, the game finally over. She pressed her face into Kesha's shoulder and whispered 4 words that only her mother could hear. "Can we go home now?" And Kesha, crying and laughing at the same time, whispered back, "Yes, baby. Yes, we can." The crowd roared on. The cameras kept recording. The world kept watching. But for 2 people on that platform, a mother and daughter who'd faced something impossible and survived the game, was finally, mercifully, complete. Checkmate. Not just on the board, but in every way that mattered. The video clips started uploading before Amber and Kesha had even left the mall. A teenage girl in the 3rd row had captured the final sequence on her iPhone: the rook sacrifice, Omar's confident take, Amber's queen swing, the checkmate, and posted it to TikTok with the caption, "She just ended his whole career." The algorithm recognized engagement instantly, pushed it to millions of feeds within minutes. By the time Amber and Kesha reached the parking garage, shielded by mall security from the press mob, the clip had 3 million views. By the time their taxi merged onto Sheikh Zayed Road, it had 10 million. By the time they reached their small apartment in the workers' quarters, climbing 3 flights of stairs past neighbors who'd watched on their phones and now stood in doorways, staring. The video had been shared 500,000 times, spawned 200 reaction videos, and been picked up by news outlets on 6 continents. The internet had found its moment, and the internet was hungry. TikTok, 11:47 p.m. A split-screen video showing Omar's confident face at the start of the match next to his devastated expression at checkmate, set to the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme. 15 million views in 2 hours. Twitter, 11:52 p.m. Or at Chesscom News. 3-year-old Amber Williams defeats billionaire Omar Al Mansoor for the 3rd time in Dubai Mall exhibition. Analysis of the final combination shows master-level calculation. This girl is the real deal. Checkmate Omar. 52,000 retweets. 180,000 likes. Instagram, 12:03 a.m. A chess influencer with 2 million followers posts a breakdown of Amber's rook sacrifice. This is what genius looks like. She saw 7 moves ahead while playing rapid chess. Omar never stood a chance. Amber the prodigy. Comments flood in. Money can't buy talent. She's 13 and better than 99% of adults. Omar thought he could buy a win. This is what happens when ego meets genius. Reddit, 12:15 a.m. Chess megathread. Amber Williams versus Omar Al Mansoor. Game 3 analysis. Top comment, 18,000 upvotes. I'm a FIDE master, and I didn't see that rook sacrifice. I thought she was cracking under pressure. Then the queen swing happened, and I literally stood up from my desk. This kid is going to be world champion one day. Mark my words. YouTube, 12:28 a.m. Agadmater, 35M subscribers. Uploads. 1 3-year-old destroys billionaire. With brilliant sacrifice, Amber Williams versus Omar Al Mansoor. The video reaches 1 million views before sunrise. In their apartment, Kesha's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications cascaded like a waterfall, each one carrying an opportunity, a request, a demand for Amber's attention. CNN International wanted an exclusive interview. Good Morning America offered to fly them to New York. A chess academy in Moscow offered full scholarship plus stipend. A sports agency in London wanted to discuss representation. A publisher inquired about a memoir. A documentary filmmaker proposed a feature. A luxury watch brand offered endorsement money that was triple Kesha's annual salary. Kesha sat on the edge of her bed, phone in trembling hands, scrolling through messages that felt like hallucinations, like someone else's life accidentally sent to her number. Amber sat cross-legged on the floor, still in her white dress, the pocket watch in her lap, staring at nothing in particular. The exhaustion was hitting her now. 3 games in 3 days, the weight of thousands watching, the pressure of performance compressed into moments where a single wrong move would have meant catastrophe. Baby, Kesha said softly, there's a woman from IMG Sports. She says she can... Her voice cracked. She says she can change our lives. Management. Sponsorships. She's talking about numbers I can't even... Amber, we could leave this place. Get a real apartment. You could go to any school you want. Amber looked up at her mother, saw the hope and fear mixed together, saw the dreams that poverty had taught them not to dream suddenly appearing possible. What do you want to do? Amber asked quietly. Kesha's laugh came out like a sob. What do I want, baby? This is your moment, your choice. I just want you safe and happy. And, she gestured helplessly at the phone, at the cascading opportunities. I don't know what any of this means. I clean houses, Amber. I don't know how to navigate this. Marina knocked on the door, poked her head in without waiting for answer. Kesha, there are reporters downstairs. Building management is threatening to call police. They want you to make a statement or leave or... She stopped, took in the scene. Oh, honey, are you okay? I don't know, Kesha whispered. 84 floors above, in a penthouse that suddenly felt like a prison, Omar Al Mansoor sat in darkness. He dismissed his staff, silenced his phone, locked the doors. The city below glittered with its usual indifference. But tonight, the lights looked like eyes, like millions of witnesses to his humiliation. His tablet, The replacement for the one he'd smashed showed the news coverage he couldn't stop watching. Al Arabiya, Dubai billionaire suffers third consecutive defeat to teen chess prodigy. BBC World. Viral sensation. 13-year-old girl checkmates businessman in Dubai Mall spectacle. The Guardian. Omar Al Mansoor's public defeat raises questions about ego, class, and the viral age. The stock market had responded with brutal efficiency. Al Mansoor Enterprises stock had dropped 7% overnight. Not because of fundamentals or earnings, but because investor confidence was a story, and the story had changed. The man who ran the company had been publicly humiliated 3 times by a child. That meant something to markets, meant weakness, meant judgment failure, meant risk. His phone, which he'd muted but couldn't help checking, showed 47 missed calls. Board members, major shareholders, his PR team, all of them wanting explanations, wanting damage control, wanting him to fix what he'd broken. Farid's message was the most direct. Emergency board meeting requested. 9 a.m. tomorrow. They're discussing your position. Call me. A knock on the door. Omar ignored it. Another knock, more insistent. Sir, it's Farid. Please, we need to talk. Omar said nothing, stared at his reflection in the dark window, a ghost of himself. A man who'd spent decades building an image of invincibility, only to have it shattered by someone not old enough to drive. Farid used his keycard, entered cautiously. He held his tablet like a shield, his expression carefully neutral but unable to hide the concern beneath. Sir, the board is demanding a response. The press is calling it the most viral chess match in history. Your face is literally a meme in 40 languages. He paused. Sir, with respect, you need to step away from the spotlight. Issue a statement. Gracious. Humble. Congratulate the girl. Announce you're stepping back from public appearances to focus on business. Donate money to chess education in her name. Turn this into what? Omar's voice was hoarse from disuse. A redemption story? A learning moment? Into something other than what it is now. Farid set the tablet on the coffee table, showed him the trending topics. Checkmate Omar, Amber the prodigy, billionaire gets schooled. Sir, you need to apologize. The word hung in the air like smoke. Apologize? Omar turned slowly, and in his eyes was something dark, something that made Farid instinctively step back. To a maid's child? For what? For playing chess? For accepting a challenge he initiated? For making it personal? For making it public? For, Farid chose his words carefully, for turning what should have been a private game into a spectacle that's damaged everything you've built. Omar stood, walked to the window, his fists clenched at his sides. Behind his eyes he could hear it, the roar of the crowd at Dubai Mall, thousands of voices celebrating his defeat. The laughter from the first game, the whispers from the second, the explosion of joy when she delivered checkmate. The sound echoed in his skull like thunder, like mockery, like the universe itself laughing at his pretensions. Get out, he said quietly. Sir? Get out. Omar's voice cracked like a whip, and for the first time in 15 years working together, Farid saw something in his employer that looked like true instability, like a man standing on the edge of something he couldn't control. Farid left without another word. Alone again, Omar stood at his window overlooking the city he'd helped build, and felt the walls closing in. Every news alert was a nail in a coffin. Every meme was a judgment. Every think piece about class and ego and viral culture was a prosecution he couldn't defend against. He'd won at everything his entire life: business, politics, influence. He'd believed that winning was what he was, not just what he did. And a 13-year-old girl had proven him wrong. 3 times. In front of the world. He pulled out his phone, typed a message to his PR team. Issue a statement. I'm taking a sabbatical. Personal reasons. Effective immediately. Then he threw the phone onto the couch, poured a scotch he didn't want, and sat in the darkness wondering how you rebuild a reputation when the entire world has watched it crumble. 3 days later, Amber sat in Marina's apartment, slightly larger than theirs, with a small balcony that caught morning light across from a woman in an expensive suit who'd flown in from New York. The woman's name was Rebecca Chen. She represented athletes, chess players, esports champions, anyone with marketable talent and viral appeal. She'd brought a contract, a presentation deck, and a vision of Amber's future that involved sponsors, training camps, international tournaments, and media appearances that would make her one of the most recognized faces in chess. "The watch brand I mentioned," Rebecca said, sliding a mock-up across the table. "They're offering $200,000 for a one-year endorsement. Just a few photos, maybe a video. You'd be their youngest ambassador ever." Kesha's hand went to her mouth. $200,000, more than she'd earn in 5 years of cleaning. Rebecca continued. "And that's just the beginning. Chess.com wants you for their platform. Netflix is interested in documentary rights. There's talk of a biopic if—" "No," Amber said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She sat very still, her grandfather's pocket watch on the table in front of her, her hands folded in her lap. "No?" Rebecca's smile didn't waver, but confusion flickered in her eyes. "Which part?" "All of it," Amber said. "Thank you. Really. But no." Kesha leaned forward. "Baby, maybe we should think about—" "People didn't watch because they loved chess," Amber said, her voice steady, calm, stating facts. "They watched for revenge. They watched to see a rich man lose. They watched because it felt good to see someone powerful brought down." She looked at Rebecca. "That's not respect. That's entertainment. And I didn't play for entertainment." Rebecca opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "Then what did you play for?" "For my mom, for my grandpa, for myself." Amber picked up the pocket watch, felt its familiar weight. "And because someone needed to show him that money doesn't make you better than people who have less." The room was silent. Finally, Kesha spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "What do you want then? What do you need?" Amber thought about it. "A quiet school, where no one knows who I am. Time to study chess the right way, not just for cameras. And," she looked at her mother, "and for you not to have to work 2 jobs anymore." Rebecca cleared her throat. "I can help with that. More modest representation, background work, strategic partnerships that respect your privacy." She paused. "But Amber, the world wants to know your story. You can tell it on your terms, or others will tell it for you." "Then let them," Amber said simply. "My grandpa used to say the game matters, not the crowd watching it." After Rebecca left promising to send revised proposals, respecting their wishes, already calculating a different approach, Kesha pulled Amber close. "You're braver than I ever was," she whispered. "No," Amber said. "I just played chess. You survived. That's braver." Outside, the Dubai sun began its descent toward the Gulf, turning the sky gold and orange and purple. The towers cast long shadows. Traffic hummed its eternal song. Life continued, indifferent to viral moments and shattered pride and 13-year-old girls who'd done the impossible. And in a small apartment in the workers' quarters, a mother and daughter sat together in comfortable silence. The storm finally passed. The world still spinning, their lives forever changed, but somehow, impossibly, still their own. The internet would move on, the memes would fade, the news cycle would find new spectacles. But somewhere in the algorithm, in the permanent record of digital memory, the story remained. A girl who refused to move backward, a man who learned too late that some things can't be bought, and a checkmate that meant more than victory. It meant dignity reclaimed. It meant proof that genius doesn't need permission. It meant that sometimes, just sometimes, the pawn reaches the other side of the board and becomes something no one expected. Something unstoppable. Something free. The first investor to pull out did so quietly, through lawyers and intermediaries, citing portfolio rebalancing and strategic realignment. The second was more direct, a phone call to Omar's CFO explaining that recent events have created concerns about leadership, stability. By the third, the pattern was clear, and the financial press smelled blood. Bloomberg, Week 1. Al Mansoor Enterprises faces investor exodus following viral chess defeats. Financial Times, Week 2. Omar Al Mansoor steps back from public role amid questions about judgment. Gulf Business, Week 3. Board members seek interim CEO as Al Mansoor takes indefinite leave. The empire he'd built over 2 decades didn't collapse overnight, empires never do. But it cracked, fault lines spreading through the foundation like water through stone in winter, the pressure inexorable, the damage cumulative. A luxury hotel project in Abu Dhabi lost its lead investor. A joint venture in renewable energy stalled when the European partners requested time to reassess the relationship. His board of directors, men he'd handpicked for their loyalty, began holding meetings he wasn't invited to, making decisions that were presented to him as fait accompli rather than consultation. The architecture of power, he learned, was built on confidence, and confidence, once shattered, was nearly impossible to rebuild. He stopped going to the office, stopped taking calls, stopped appearing at the charity galas and business summits where he'd once held court like an unofficial king. His penthouse became a kind of voluntary exile, expensive, isolated, increasingly irrelevant. Farid checked in daily, bringing documents that needed signatures, updates that grew grimmer by the week. But even Farid's visits grew shorter, his discomfort more visible. No one knew how to be around a man who'd fallen from such height, who sat in his glass tower drinking scotch and watching the city through windows that felt more like screens than portals. It was a Thursday night, 3 weeks after the final match, when Omar did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He left his tower without a destination, without security, without purpose. He walked. The streets of Dubai Marina were crowded with the usual evening commerce tourists, taking photos, families window shopping, young couples holding hands, all of them participating in the eternal dance of commerce and desire that kept cities alive. No one recognized him. Without his tailored clothes, without his entourage, without the context of power, he was just another middle-aged man in casual clothes, invisible in the way that wealth usually prevented. The anonymity felt strange, liberating and humiliating simultaneously. His feet carried him without conscious direction away from the marina, past the construction sites that never slept, through neighborhoods where the buildings grew shorter and the streets narrower, where the smell of cooking spices replaced the sterile air conditioning of luxury districts. He found himself on Al-Baha Street. As the call to Maghrib prayer echoed from the small mosque at the corner, a modest building compared to the grand architectural statements of the Jumeirah Mosque or the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque. This was a neighborhood place, a mosque for workers and shopkeepers, for people who prayed because they believed, not because it photographed well. Omar stood outside for a long moment, listening to the familiar Arabic phrases he'd heard his entire life but rarely paused to consider. The words washed over him like water, like cleansing, like judgment. He removed his shoes at the entrance, left his watch, the Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's cars, in his pocket. Inside, the carpet was worn but clean, the walls simple white, the minbar modest wood rather than marble and gold. A few men sat scattered throughout the space, a taxi driver still in his uniform, an elderly man with a prayer mat so old it was soft as cloth, a young father with a child sleeping beside him. They glanced at Omar, nodded polite greetings, returned to their contemplations. Omar found a space in the back, sat on the carpet, and for the first time in decades, let himself be still. Not meditating, not praying exactly, just existing, without agenda, without performance, without the constant calculation of advantage and perception that had governed his life for so long. Memories flickered through his mind like cards being shuffled. His grandfather, a pearl diver before the oil came, who died with calloused hands and a humble smile. His father, who'd turned a small shipping business into an empire through intelligence and ruthlessness. Himself, who'd taken that empire and multiplied it, who'd confused multiplication with meaning. The 3 games played through his mind in slow motion, not the moves, but the moments. Amber's calm face across the board, Kesha's frightened eyes, the crowd's roar of celebration at his defeat, the feeling of his carefully constructed identity crumbling like sandcastles at high tide. Outside, a child's laughter rang out high and pure, the sound of unself-conscious joy. Through the mosque's window, Omar could see a young girl, maybe 10 or 11, playing with a younger sibling, their mother watching from a nearby bench. The girl was teaching her brother something, patient and encouraging, her face lit with the pleasure of sharing knowledge. It reminded him of Amber, Not her face that was different, but her patience, her certainty, her understanding that the game mattered more than the audience. Perhaps, Omar murmured to himself, to the empty air, to God, if God was listening. She wasn't my punishment. Perhaps she was my teacher. The words sat in the air like truth finally spoken. The elderly man with the soft prayer mat glanced over, caught Omar's eye, and smiled, not recognition, not judgment, just the acknowledgement of one human seeing another. Omar found himself smiling back, a real smile, the first in weeks that wasn't performance or mask. He sat in that small mosque until the evening deepened to night, until the call to Isha prayer brought a new wave of worshippers, until his legs went numb and his mind went quiet. When he finally stood to leave, he felt lighter somehow. Not forgiven, he understood that forgiveness was something you earned, not something you claimed, but lighter, as if the weight of ego had been, if not removed, at least acknowledged for what it was, a burden he'd chosen to carry, and could choose perhaps to set down. Across the city, in the workers' quarters that had been their home for 18 months, Kesha taped the last box shut and sat back on her heels, surveying their small apartment one final time, empty now except for boxes labeled in her careful handwriting. Books, clothes, kitchen, Amber's things. A lifetime of transient living condensed into 8 cardboard containers that would fit in a shipping pod to Boston, where a scholarship to Cambridge International Academy waited full tuition, housing stipend, chess coaching, and, most impossibly, a job for Kesha in the school's administration office. A fairy tale ending, Marina had called it, a Disney movie come to life. But sitting in their empty apartment, listening to Dubai's traffic hum through thin walls, Kesha felt only a confused mixture of relief and melancholy. Relief to be leaving, yes. Relief that Amber would have opportunities that seemed impossible a month ago. But also sadness for Marina and the other maids who wouldn't escape, for the version of herself who'd arrived here with hope that had been systematically ground down, for the city itself that looked so beautiful from a distance, but felt so hard up close. Amber emerged from the bathroom, her backpack over one shoulder, her grandfather's pocket watch around her neck. She'd been saying goodbye to Marina's kids next door, had come back quiet and thoughtful. "The journalists are still downstairs," she said. "Marina says there's 3 news vans now. They want a statement before we leave." Kesha closed her eyes, exhaustion and frustration washing over her. Even their departure couldn't be private. Everything had to be content, had to be story, had to be consumed by an audience that would forget them the moment the next spectacle appeared. "We'll go out the back," Kesha said. "Through the service entrance. We don't owe them anything." "Mum," Amber said softly, "what about Omar?" Kesha looked up, surprised. "What about him?" "I've been thinking about him." Amber sat down on the floor beside her mother, cross-legged, fingers playing with the pocket watch. "What Grandpa used to say about chess, that every game teaches something if you're willing to learn, and that the hardest lessons come from the games you lose. Baby, Omar has lost everything he cares about. His reputation, his company, his pride. I'm not sure." "He's not evil," Amber interrupted gently. "He was just lost, just confused about what matters." She looked at her mother with those 2 knowing eyes. "Grandpa said that's the most dangerous kind of person. Not evil. Just lost, because they can hurt people without meaning to." Kesha reached out, tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her daughter's ear. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I just paid attention to Grandpa." Amber smiled sadly. "And I think maybe Omar needs to hear that someone forgives him. Not because he deserves it, but because carrying anger is heavy, and we're about to get on a plane. I don't want to carry it across the ocean." Kesha studied her daughter, this small person who'd faced a billionaire 3 times and won not just games but something larger. This questions overlapping into noise. "Amber, how does it feel to be leaving Dubai? Will you play professionally? Do you have any message for Omar Al Mansoor?" "Kesha, what do you want people to know about your daughter?" Amber stopped at the bottom of the steps, her mother's hand in hers, and looked directly at the nearest camera. When she spoke, her voice was calm, clear. carrying the weight of someone who'd learned to speak truth without armor. My grandpa used to tell me that chess is a game where everyone starts equal. Same pieces, same board, same rules. What matters is what you do with what you're given. She paused, squeezed her mother's hand. I'm grateful I got to play. I'm grateful for the lesson, and I hope everyone who watched learned something about what really matters. Which is, a reporter called out. Amber smiled. A 13-year-old girl again. Not a symbol or a prodigy, or a viral sensation, just a kid who'd been through something hard and come out the other side. Kindness, she said simply. And knowing when to move forward and when to let go. They walked to the waiting taxi, not running, not hiding, just walking with dignity intact. Marina waved from her window, tears streaming down her face. Other neighbors watched from doorways, some smiling, some crying, all of them knowing they were watching someone escape the trap that held them all. The envelope was left at Al Mansoor Tower's front desk with instructions to deliver it to the penthouse. The clerk promised he would, recognized the names, understood this was important even if he didn't know why. Omar found the envelope 3 days later, mixed in with the stack of mail and documents that Farid had left on his dining table. He almost threw it away, another letter from a stranger with opinions about his failures, another piece of correspondence he didn't want to read. But the handwriting stopped him, a child's printing, careful and clear, and the return address, the workers' quarters he owned, that he'd never visited, that he'd treated as invisible infrastructure, rather than home to human beings with names and stories and daughters who played chess better than billionaires. He opened it carefully, unfolded the single sheet of notebook paper, read the words written in pencil. Dear Mr. Al Mansoor, my grandpa used to say that every loss is a teacher if you're willing to be a student. Thank you for playing with me. Thank you for the lesson. I hope you learned something too. Life is like chess, you can't take back moves, but you can choose better ones going forward. Respectfully, Amber Williams. Omar read it 3 times, each reading hitting different, first with disbelief, then with something that might have been grief, finally with something that felt almost like release. A 13-year-old girl who had every right to gloat, to mock, to pour salt in wounds that still bled had chosen grace instead, had chosen to see him not as an enemy defeated, but as a human being capable of learning, had offered forgiveness he hadn't asked for and didn't deserve. He set the note on his coffee table where it caught the late afternoon light streaming through his floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below continued its eternal commerce, indifferent to one man's moment of reckoning. But in that moment, in that expensive penthouse that suddenly felt less like a prison and more like a starting point, Omar Al Mansoor understood something he'd spent 55 years avoiding. That being humbled wasn't the same as being destroyed. That losing could be the beginning of finding something you didn't know was missing. That a child's forgiveness could weigh more than a kingdom's wealth. He picked up his phone, called Farid, and said 4 words he hadn't spoken in decades. I need your help. Outside, the sun set over the Persian Gulf, turning the sky orange and gold and purple, the same sky that looked down on billionaires and maids, on penthouse suites and workers' quarters, on everyone who played the game of life with whatever pieces they'd been given. And somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, a mother and daughter flew toward a new beginning, carrying only what mattered, leaving the rest behind. The game was over. The lessons remained. And in the end, that was enough. Boston, Massachusetts. 2 years later. Spring, 2027. The chess club at Cambridge International Academy occupied a converted library annex, tall windows letting in the particular quality of New England's spring light, all that green clarity after months of grey winter. Wooden tables bore the scars of decades of use. Chess sets ranging from plastic school equipment to antique wooden pieces donated by alumni who'd learned the game in this same room generations before. Amber Williams, now 15, sat at the demonstration board at the front of the room, facing a visiting player from MIT, a mathematics doctoral candidate who'd been regional champion in high school. Around them, 30 younger students sat cross-legged on the floor or perched on tables, watching the exhibition game with rapt attention. She'd grown in 2 years, not just taller, but more settled somehow, more comfortable in her skin. Her blonde hair was shorter now, practical rather than decorative. She wore jeans and a Cambridge Academy sweater, her grandfather's pocket watch still on its chain around her neck, no longer hidden, but worn openly, proudly. The position on the board was complex, tactical, the kind of middle game where both players had chances and one mistake would be decisive. The MIT student his nameplate read, David Shen, mathematics PhD candidate, was good. Very good. He'd built a strong position, coordinated his pieces, created threats that required precise defense. But Amber had learned things in 2 years that went beyond chess moves. She'd studied with grandmasters via online coaching. She'd played in tournaments across New England, her rating climbing steadily toward expert level. She'd learned to manage pressure, to think through fatigue, to find resources when positions looked hopeless. More than that, she'd learned to enjoy the game again, to play for the beauty of the positions rather than the weight of expectation, to win and lose with equal grace. She moved her knight to d5, a quiet move that looked defensive but opened hidden possibilities. David frowned, studied the board, moved his bishop to pin the knight. Amber smiled faintly, not gloating, just recognizing a pattern she'd seen before. She'd learned to read chess positions the way some people read faces, seeing the story beneath the surface, the tension and possibility encoded in wood and squares. 3 moves later, she sacrificed that pinned knight deliberately, purposefully, and David's position collapsed like a house of cards. The combination was elegant, economical, the kind of chess that made the watching students gasp and lean forward. Checkmate in 4, she said softly, showing him the continuation. David studied the position, saw the inevitability, and extended his hand with a genuine smile. That was beautiful. Where did you learn to see that far ahead? My grandfather, Amber said, shaking his hand. And a lot of practice. The students erupted into applause. A few asked questions about the combination, the pattern recognition, the calculation required. Amber answered patiently, breaking down the position, showing the decision tree that had led her to see the sacrifice 5 moves before it appeared on the board. In the back of the room, Kesha Williams watched her daughter teach, and felt something in her chest that might have been pride or relief, or simply gratitude, that they'd survived long enough to reach this moment. She worked now as an administrative coordinator for the academy, a real job with benefits and respect, where Maid was something she'd been, not something she was. She'd taken night classes at Boston University, studying business administration, building toward a future that looked nothing like the past. Her apartment was small, but hers a studio in Cambridge with a window that caught morning light, where she could hear the Charles River if she opened the window, where no one called her help or treated her as invisible infrastructure. After the exhibition ended, after the students had filed out chattering about the night sacrifice, Amber came over to where her mother stood. You were brilliant, Kesha said, pulling her into a hug. He was good, Amber replied. I just saw the pattern first. Your grandfather would be so proud. Amber touched the pocket watch. I think he knows. They walked home together through Cambridge's tree-lined streets, past the university buildings and bookstores and coffee shops where students argued philosophy over lattes. A different world from Dubai, softer somehow, less vertical, more human-scaled. Do you ever think about him? Kesha asked quietly as they waited at a crosswalk. Omar? Amber was silent for a moment. Sometimes. I wonder if he learned anything. If it changed anything for him. Does it matter? I don't know, Amber said honestly. I hope so. Not for me. For him. The light changed. They crossed together, mother and daughter, hand in hand, toward the small apartment that was more home than any mansion could ever be. Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Same day. Evening. The Al Zahra Chess Academy occupied a modest building in Deira, far from the glass towers of Dubai Marina, in a neighborhood where workers lived and children played in streets rather than climate-controlled lobbies. The building had been a warehouse once, converted with careful attention to what children actually needed. Good lighting, comfortable tables, a small library, bathrooms that worked, and windows that opened to let in air that tasted like life rather than filtration. Omar Al Mansoor walked through the main room as evening classes ended, children gathering their belongings, chattering in Arabic and Urdu and Tagalog and a dozen other languages. He wore simple clothes, khakis, and a button-down shirt. No Patek Philippe, no entourage, no performance of power. He came here twice a week, not as benefactor or board member, but as volunteer. He helped set up boards, answered questions when the instructors were busy, learned names and listened to stories. The children knew him as Mr. Omar, the helper, not as the billionaire who'd been humiliated online, whose face had been a meme, whose empire had crumbled and slowly, painfully, been rebuilt into something smaller but more honest. 2 years of therapy, 2 years of learning to sit with discomfort, 2 years of understanding that the armor he'd worn his entire life had been both protection and prison. He'd stepped back from Al Mansoor Enterprises' public-facing role, installed a CEO who actually cared about long-term value over quarterly ego boosts. He'd liquidated assets, paid debts, rebuilt relationships not through dominance but through actual partnership. The company was smaller now, more focused, more sustainable, more ethical, if he was honest, which he tried to be these days. The academy had been his idea, funded through a foundation that bore his father's name rather than his own, staffed by actual chess educators rather than society connections. It offered free lessons to children whose families couldn't afford private coaching, free equipment, free tournament entry fees. It wasn't charity as performance. It was investment in something that mattered more than returns. On the wall near the entrance, a quote had been painted in English and Arabic, simple black letters on white background. Genius knows no status. Anonymous. Beneath it, a small photo gallery showed successful students' children who'd gone on to win tournaments, earn scholarships, find opportunities that chess had unlocked. In the center, slightly larger than the others, was a photo Omar had found online and printed. Amber Williams at a tournament in Boston, concentrating on a chessboard, her grandfather's pocket watch visible around her neck. He paused by it as he did every time he visited, studying her focused expression, remembering the 3 games that had broken him, and, eventually, rebuilt him into something closer to human. A small smile touched his lips, not bitter, not envious, but genuinely warm. Pride, maybe, in what she'd become. Gratitude for what she'd taught him. Mr. Omar? He turned. A young girl, maybe 10, stood holding a chess problem on a photocopied worksheet. Can you help me? I don't understand how white wins. Omar crouched down to her level, something he'd learned to do, to make himself smaller for children rather than expecting them to grow to meet him. He studied the position, a complex endgame, white to move and win. Tell me what you see, he said gently. The king needs to get to the pawn, she said, tracing the path with her finger. But the black king can stop it. So what's the trick? She thought, her face scrunched in concentration. Then her eyes lit up. The white king doesn't go straight. It goes around. Exactly. Sometimes the direct path isn't the right path. Sometimes you have to go the long way to reach where you need to be. She smiled, understanding clicking into place, and ran off to show her friend the solution. Omar stood, feeling his knees protest 57 now, no longer young, his body reminding him of time's passage. He walked to the small office in the back, where the academy's director was finishing paperwork. Same time Thursday? She asked, looking up. Same time, Omar confirmed. As he left the building, stepping into Dubai's warm evening, he passed the small courtyard where a few children still played, practicing tactics, laughing over blunders. One boy moved a pawn forward on a portable board, his friend nodding approval. Omar paused, watching them, remembering his grandfather, the pearl diver, who died with nothing but had lived with dignity. His father, who'd built wealth but forgot to build wisdom. Himself, who'd confused victory with value, and had needed a 13-year-old girl to teach him the difference. In his pocket, he carried a folded piece of paper, the note Amber had sent 2 years ago, worn soft now from being read and reread. Thank you for the lesson. He whispered the words like a prayer, like a promise. Move forward. Images dissolve into each other, time compressed, moments selected to tell the story of what came after. Cambridge International Academy. Amber sits in a circle of younger students, 7 or 8 of them, all watching as she demonstrates a tactic on a small board. One child asks a question, Amber's patient explanation, her hands moving pieces, showing possibilities. The children's faces lighting up with understanding. A boy who reminds her of herself quiet, serious, watching everything asks, How do you know what move to make? And Amber smiles, touches her grandfather's watch, says words we can't hear, but can imagine. You listen. You think. You trust yourself. Boston apartment. Kesha, at the window of their studio, morning light streaming in, a cup of coffee in her hands. She's reading a textbook for her night classes. Papers spread on the table behind her show grades. A-, A+. She's building something degree by degree, choice by choice. She laughs at something on her phone, a text from Marina in Dubai, still cleaning houses but saving money, still dreaming of escape. Kesha types back, encouraging, supportive, the friendship sustained across oceans and time zones. On the wall, a photo. Kesha and Amber at Cambridge Academy's winter showcase, both smiling, Amber holding a small trophy. Kesha's arm around her daughter, both of them free in ways that have nothing to do with money. Al Zahra, Chess Academy, Dubai. Omar in the courtyard at dusk, the last children being picked up by parents. He's setting up boards for tomorrow's class, the repetitive work, meditative, mindful. A small girl runs up to him. Mr. Omar, I won my game today. He smiles, real, genuine, says, tell me about it. Later, alone in the empty room, he sits at one of the tables, a chessboard in front of him. He places a single pawn on e2, studies it for a long moment, that humble piece that becomes powerful only by moving forward, only by refusing to retreat. He moves it to e4, then removes it from the board entirely. The board empty now. Possibility rather than position. He whispers to the quiet room, to the memory of the girl who beat him, to the man he's trying to become. Move forward. A voice emerges from the darkness, neither Amber's nor Omar's, but something timeless. The voice of story itself. Some kings lose their crowns to remember they were men. Some queens rise from pawns to remind the world what power truly means. The game continues. Not on boards of pearl and obsidian, not in palaces of glass and gold, but in quiet rooms where children learn to think, in humble spaces where losing teaches more than winning ever could, where a grandfather's wisdom lives on in a broken pocket watch, where a mother's sacrifice becomes a daughter's strength, where a billionaire's fall becomes the first step towards standing on solid ground. The pieces reset, the players change, but the lessons remain. That genius knows no status. That dignity can't be bought or sold. That sometimes the smallest move, a pawn pushed forward, a note of forgiveness sent, a choice to teach rather than triumph, changes everything. Checkmate isn't the end. It's the moment you understand what the game was really about. In loving memory of all the grandparents who taught us to play, to think, to see beyond the obvious move. And for the children still learning that the board doesn't care about your last name, your address, or the size of your tower. It only cares whether you have the courage to move.